Hello, everybody. I know there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the market right now, especially regarding HEX and PulseChain, as people are scared, they don't know what's going to happen, and the SEC seems to be the biggest centralized concern for everybody. And people are going to speculate and just come up with all these conjectures and imaginary horribles of the worst case scenario that could possibly happen. And oftentimes these people don't know anything about what they're talking about. They have no real world experience. Quite frequently, they are just generic anime profile pictures or Pepe the Frog Twitter accounts that just want to see HEX fail. And there's a lot of hate out there. There's a lot of hate for PulseChain, HEX, and Richard Hart specifically, whether or not it's really grounded in any facts. But in this video, I'm going to talk about some of the worst case scenario planning. And this was an idea put forth by Tim Ferriss in a book I read once called The 4-Hour Workweek. And Tim Ferriss basically has this exercise that you can do to calm yourself down if you are afraid. So I hope this helps some people when you're trying to get a handle on what's going on and why. I firmly believe in the bottom of my heart that we're all going to be fine. The products themselves are untouchable. They're immutable code. And one day when the prices come back, the narrative is going to change. And at the end of the day, guys, really, it's just the narrative follows the price action. We're in a bear market. Prices are down. Sentiment is down. And so you can show me the candle, the color of the candle, and I will show you the news. I will spin the news for you based on the color of the candle. If the candles were green and everything was going up, this SEC fear, uncertainty, and doubt would be spun in a way of, oh, Richard's going to beat the SEC, right? Richard's on his way to beating the SEC, but now that prices are down, it's just kind of another nail in the coffin for the prices. And it's a way for people to look at it and invent reasons why they don't want to get involved. And that's okay. This video is not to convince you to buy or sell your HEX. There's no financial advice that I've ever given. And you definitely shouldn't be looking to random people on YouTube and Twitter. I say this all the time for your financial advice. Whatever decisions you make need to be from yourself. Nobody clicks the buy or sell button for you at the end of the day. But I'm telling you why I'm not clicking sell. In fact, I'm clicking buy, especially on HEX and PLS in particular. I am actually buying these coins because I see this as a final capitulation wick. And yes, things can always get worse, all right? Nobody saw the SEC thing coming. Nobody figured the price would drop 50% in 2 days. But at some point, the market runs out of sellers. At some point, things literally cannot get any worse. And I really strongly feel like we're at that point right now. And that's just my speculation as well. But again, I think it helps to come up with some worst case scenario imaginary horribles to realize that they're all not so bad, right? Now, what I'm saying is not meant to scare anybody. So if you're easily frightened, if you've got a weak stomach, right, maybe this isn't even the game for you to be playing. Right? Crypto is the most volatile asset class in the history of mankind. But I'll come back to this at the end. The price you pay for the mad gains is the extreme volatility. And volatility means prices go up way higher than you ever thought possible and down way lower than you ever thought possible. And this is the part where if you can't sit through this, right, if it's going to keep you up at night or if you bet more than you were willing to lose, this is what we've been talking about. Crypto is always prone to 90% dips, 95% dips. My net worth dropped to probably about 90%, right? I didn't buy the top, but I didn't buy the bottom either, okay? I bought all along the way, and right now I'm sitting at heavy losses on paper, just like probably all of you are watching this video. So number one, the thing that I hear a lot of people just throwing around these scare tactics is, oh, Richard Hart's going to jail, right? Now, I want to address this and say that, first of all, real scammers out there have stayed out of jail for doing a lot more actual scamming. I mean, in my mind, scammers have been investigated and targeted by the SEC and stayed out of jail. And why is that? Well, number one, the SEC is a civil agency, right? They do civil claims, and the complaint against Richard is a civil claim. It's not a criminal, right? But the SEC does work with the DOJ, Department of Justice, to gather evidence. And based on the evidence they gather, if they find enough, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, Richard misappropriated the funds. Now, knowing that Richard was a Bitcoin multimillionaire and a serial entrepreneur before this, when you're talking about a guy that's buying, $12,000 worth of sports cars and diamonds and stuff, $12 million, it's just a tiny, tiny fraction of his overall net worth. When you think about a guy that's already rich, but let's say this guy, let's say he buys the world's most expensive diamond with funds raised from, various projects or whatever, and openly brags about them, by the way. I mean, you don't see a lot of people misappropriating funds and then openly talking about them online, right? I mean, you can look at the hex.com diamond. It's on the homepage of the website, right? If that was a misappropriation of funds, typically people would probably not want to be so public about that. So I am of the belief that there was no misappropriation of funds. But let's say that there was. And let's say that this was somehow enough to grant further trials and the Department of Justice got involved, which I don't even think that they would get involved for something of this magnitude. I think a couple $1 million misappropriated would not even be enough to land somebody in jail, especially with the right lawyers. And look, I think this case is going to go on for probably 1 to 2 more years if I had to guess, assuming Richard's going to fight it. But let's just say, because we're talking about imaginary horribles, right? Worst case scenario, Richard's in jail. What happens? What happens to HEX, PulseChain, PulseX? They're fine. They live on. Why did they live on? Because HEX.com, the smart contract, lives on a blockchain with no admin keys, and Richard has literally nothing to do with it. I say this all the time, but knock on wood, the man could get hit by a bus tomorrow, and all of the code that he founded lives on. See, PulseX, and HEX, these were all just ideas that came out of Richard Hart's head, and developers built them. Richard Hart's not even a developer, by the way. Now, you can go look at the GitLab on PulseChain.com. You can notice that Richard Hart isn't even the original owner of the GitLab, number one. Number two, he's never even made a commit or, added to the code in any way. It's entirely community driven by completely different people that are not Richard Hart, okay? So all this reliance on some kind of a leader, I think in the community is a very toxic way to look at these things. And I think a lot of people would sleep better at night, not trying to rely on somebody else to pump their bags for them, not trying to hold on to Stockholm syndrome of, oh, why isn't Richard Hart streaming? One guy streaming doesn't make the price go up. And one guy, if he went away, and whatever that might look like, again, I give this a near zero likelihood of happening. But if Richard was on another planet, HEX and PulseX would run fine because they are immutable smart contracts that live on a blockchain. PulseChain would run fine because, look, all of the validators maintaining PulseChain aren't even ran by Richard anymore. He was very open and public about powering down all of his validators, and now there's 35,000 validators. PulseChain is the second most decentralized blockchain after Ethereum in terms of number of validators. Maybe Bitcoin as well, but that's kind of a different case. These are real people, real community members validating the blockchain and ensuring that the blockchain survives, right? I'm a validator, and I know thousands of other validators out there, and you can't stop something that's truly decentralized. When you look at the code has commits by all sorts of different contributors. And all these different contributors to the code, they are not Richard. They're not the one being called into question here. So PulseChain lives on and is maintained by a community, right? The validators are a community. Even the developers are a community. All the builders are the community, right? And this is how decentralized software works and why it's really not that scary when you think about, oh my God, what if Richard went to jail? Again, near zero likelihood, in my opinion. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a financial advisor. I don't see that happening. It's very hard for me to see a reality where that happens, although there is a non-zero chance, right? So let's be honest about that. But then let's say if in that reality, what happens? You still can trade your Pulse. You still can trade HEX. PulseChain exists, okay? You've still got all these immutable smart contracts. As long as the internet is still up, as long as we don't get hit by a meteor or a solar flare, and then we've got bigger problems, on our hands. But HEX and PulseX, they launched complete with no off switch. PulseChain launched complete with no off switch, okay? What's the likelihood of all 35,000 validators shutting down at the same time? I'm going to say almost 0.0000001%, okay? So I'm okay with taking that gamble. Guys, I'm holding my HEX bags, holding my PulseChain, PulseX bags. In fact, I'm even scooping up a little more at these low prices, personally. Now, I've had another scare tactic, another fear, uncertainty, and doubt piece of information is, what if the website goes down? What if Richard is the owner of the website and they take HEX.com offline? Well, this would be far from killing HEX, guys. I want to ask a lot of you out there, maybe you've just recently gotten into HEX or PulseChain or PulseX. How many of you have even been to the website? So let's say Richard still has ownership of the website. Let's say he's not playing 4D chess. Let's say he didn't have somebody else become the owner of the website, right? Which I think is pretty likely. It's not that hard to do, not that hard to figure out. Here's a guy that's always thinking a few steps ahead, right? So, but what I hear a lot of people saying is, I heard from a lawyer that, if they make Richard cease and desist, then they could steal his domain names. Okay, let's say Hex.com goes offline. Again, very, very, very small likelihood. Did you get into Hex because of the Hex.com website? Did you go to the Hex.com website and then you bought because of the website? You probably bought because a whole different number of different people, different media, different explainer videos. You probably came to your conclusions based on a multitude of factors that were not the website. When's the last time you went to bitcoin.org? When's the last time you've been to ethereum.org? I've been buying Ethereum for a while. I don't think I've ever been to ethereum.org. All right. So we need to stop placing so much importance on things, number one, outside of our control. And number two, that we're assigning this imaginary high status to things that don't matter as much, right? The website being up or down, I think it's going to be fine. I think the websites are all going to be fine. But the websites are not the protocols. It's not like, you just go and shut off the website and that somehow shuts off HEX. No, this is a smart contract on a blockchain. Bitcoin.org is not Bitcoin the protocol. Ethereum.org is not Ethereum the protocol. So I want to dispel that myth and just say, ask yourself, when's the last time you've been to an actual crypto website? A lot of people just buy and sell this stuff all day long on decentralized exchanges just because of what they hear from their friends, family, their research online. And quite often, the website is the most minimal part of all the research. So I don't see any of the websites going down. I do think it's likely that they're not even really in custody by Richard, and I don't think it's going to come to that point where they get seized, quote unquote. But worst case scenario, right? Seizing a website is not the same as seizing a decentralized protocol, which is very hard to do, if not impossible, right? Let's say the SEC wanted to try to shut down Ethereum. They'd have to knock on 200,000 validators' doors. They'd have to probably arrest, tens, maybe 100 different developers that contributed to it. It would just be like a wild goose chase, and it would be one of the worst possible things for the look of cryptocurrency. And I just don't really feel like this is a reality that we're going to be living in, especially with the new election cycle coming up, especially with even the banks and the centralized entities like Coinbase and Kraken. Nobody's really a big fan of the SEC right now and their enforcement actions, rather than Congress getting their shit together, basically, and creating a new framework. We had the SEC regulating by enforcement using a 90-year-old framework that, quite frankly, doesn't even fit for this particular asset class, which is a brand new asset class. So the SEC is not really in favor of, by anybody, even traditional finance or the new crypto bros, right? They're not doing so well. And so all of this makes me more confident that maybe we'll be playing a game of musical chairs pretty soon when it comes to people at the SEC, or maybe their direction. And hopefully Congress will come up with some kind of a framework so we can stop playing these silly, whack-a-mole games. But crypto is really like a hydra, guys. What is the hydra? You cut one head off, 10,000 more grow in its place. It's unstoppable code. Okay, and that's what we're dealing with HEX and PulseChain here. Again, you shut the website off. The website is not the protocol. These things don't matter. And I would challenge you to ask you, when's the last time you went to bitcoin.org? Or did you just buy Bitcoin because you've heard enough about it, you've read enough about it from all kinds of different places, and you've made up your own minds and taken responsibility to click the buy or sell button. And because at the end of the day, that's what we all do. We take responsibility for ourselves. We think for ourselves. And that's what crypto is all about. You don't get to point fingers and say, this guy made me do it, because I'm not trying to make anybody buy or sell. All right. I'm telling you why I'm not scared and why you might not want to be either. Here's another imaginary horrible, number 3, right? HEX and PLS get categorized as a security. Well, in my opinion, my non-lawyer opinion, right? I think this is going to be the majority of the fight. The unregistered securities claims are the majority of the fight, not only for HEX, PulseChain, PulseX, but for Ripple, for Tron, for EOS, for Coinbase, for Kraken. The SEC is coming after almost everybody out here. And they've alleged that over 100 cryptocurrencies are potentially unregistered securities, so they say. And the reason people are very mad about this is because they give the framework of the Howey test. Right, coins try as hard as they can to pass the Howey test, and I believe objectively HEX does fail the Howey test. Rather, you want to fail the Howey test, and I think there's a good case to be made that PLS and PulseX will also fail the Howey test. That might be a little bit harder, but the lawyers are going to go at it. The lawyers are going to argue about all the definition of various words. What is an investment contract? Right? What is a sacrifice? Even the latest Coinbase filings with the SEC versus Coinbase, there was a very, very critical brief that just got filed to dismiss all the claims based on the Howey test involving an investment contract, and essentially any sales being done on a secondary market not falling into that investment contract definition, right? So that could be a nail in the coffin on the SEC side. I don't want to speak too early, but there are developments being made that are pro-crypto and anti-SEC, because really the SEC is taking an anti-innovation stance, I believe. But now let's look at some of the case law, right? Let's look at what happened with EOS. They had to pay a fine. What happened with Ripple, they had to pay a fine. They got this weird win where it was like, well, the initial ICO was a violation, but the secondary trading was fine. So Ripple paid a fine, EOS paid a fine, and in the worst case scenario, and again, I think there's a good chance that HEX, PulseChain, and PulseX get deemed not a security. I think there's a good chance that they go all the way to decision in court, and there's a very valid argument for them not to be. But this is the most uncertain one, right? This is, I'd give it maybe like a 80-20 chance in my mind. 80% not a security, 20% chance maybe they are. All right. What if they are? You pay a fine and you go about your day. That's what everyone's been doing. They've been settling with the SEC and not admitting any particular wrongdoing or not, but just saying, hey guys, get out of our hair. We want to continue to innovate. Just go away, take your money, and be happy, do whatever you want to do with that. So look, being a security, it's not the worst thing in the world, right? I believe that eventually when Congress comes up on a framework of how to properly list assets, this whole boogeyman of being a security versus not being a security will matter less and less after Congress makes up their damn minds about what can be listed and what is the proper paperwork or registration or whatever that people need to list these things if they want to be called securities. I really think they should be regulated by, the CFTC personally. Or there's many other ways to handle this than just security, not a security. But we don't live in this static world where things are going to be the same way forever. And I don't even believe that the same securities framework is going to apply to crypto for that much longer. In 2025, 6, 7, in the next election cycle, I think there will be a much more clear framework put forth, hopefully. I'm hoping for that because the whole securities thing is just slowing down centralized exchange listings. And look, people also assign a lot more importance to centralized exchange listings. So here's the big fear with the security, right? If you're a security, you can't be listed on a centralized exchange in the United States of America. Now, we're already on all kinds of other exchanges in Asia, exchanges in Poland and in Europe. The whole world is not the United States. All right, people need to realize that there are on-ramps worldwide. Let's Exchange, Change Now, Gardarian.com, all 0x Coast, great examples of new fiat on and on-ramps being built into the PulseChain and HEX ecosystem every day. Now, when HEX first launched, there was almost no way to get HEX. HEX did a 10,000x in price returns with almost zero on-ramps, right? It was very, very hard to get. You had to buy Ethereum, transfer it to a DEX, all that stuff. Now there's fiat on-ramps. Everything is just better. The community is so much bigger, stronger. We've built so much more. We've got thousands of people on our side. Back in the day when I was first starting off in HEX, right? It was me and like maybe 100 other guys. And it was maximum FUD from every direction. HEX was only listed on like one scammy centralized exchange. But everyone wants to know, win more centralized exchanges, win Coinbase, win Binance. I want to tell you guys that HEX did a 10,000x multiple ROI while only being traded on DEXs. 99% of it was only traded on DEXs, which was the way crypto was supposed to be. So take the little bit extra effort. It takes a little bit more work, takes a little bit more education, but by the time it's easy to buy on centralized exchanges, a lot of the opportunity for the price volatility will be gone. So HEX, when it started out, it had relatively little volume, relatively low liquidity compared to, Ethereum, Bitcoin. And it was only traded on Uniswap. We actually made Uniswap popular and it did a 10,000x return. So you don't need centralized exchanges to pump your bags. And I am of the belief that, let's say HEX is a security, right? Let's say PulseChain is a security. Well, when Congress figures out how to categorize these, who should be overseeing these, who should be regulating these crypto assets, I believe there will be a much more clear way to get listed on centralized exchanges, assuming that progress happens and that we don't just stagnate for infinity forever, right? So worst case scenario, if securities pay a fine, business as usual, you can't delist them off of decentralized exchanges, right? You can't stop me from buying Ethereum, transferring my Ethereum to a decentralized wallet, taking that Ethereum, swapping it for HEX, swapping it for PLS, all on decentralized exchanges. You can't stop this from happening. You can't turn off the code. All right. Richard doesn't live in his castle with some giant computer where if you press the off switch, it's like the off switch to the whole network. It doesn't work like that. All right. So realize that what you're holding is truly immutable code. It's truly crypto the way it was supposed to be. And finally, I just want to end on this note, right? A lot of people are concerned they haven't seen Richard live streaming. And it feels like Stockholm syndrome to me, honestly, guys. It's like, when's the last time you saw Vitalik live streaming? He almost never talks, right? He tweets some very valuable, smart people stuff on Twitter. And Richard Hart is taking a very similar backseat approach, just like a lot of founders do. He made a lot of noise. He was very loud in the beginning. But as time goes on, as you nurture your community, you take more of a backseat role. And I think we need to stop relying on somebody else to be the biggest cheerleader for HEX or PulseChain, right? I know it would be nice for a live stream. It would be nice to hear from him, on YouTube. But he still tweets every day. Richard still tweets every day. He still protects people from scams, educates people about what's going on, talks about, the value propositions of things like HEX, talks about new features that might exist on PulseChain. So we should be happy he's still active and alive, and really he's just doing what most other founders do. He's taking a more backseat approach, probably going into builder mode more so than cheerleader promoter mode, right? Which is actually probably a better place for him because we have such a big community now. So we are so much farther along than we were when I started this whole HEX journey in 2019. I was there at the very beginning, and man, it was rough because the FUD was coming in from every angle. At least now we have centralized FUD. And we have a 100x larger community to battle that FUD together. So I'm happy to be on this ride with all you guys. I know we're going to survive because, number one, it's unstoppable code, right? And we need to stop relying on somebody else to pump our bags. You are the network in crypto. What does that mean? If you want something to happen, you do it, right? You have the power to use your voice, use your freedom of speech, talk about cryptos that you like or you don't like, talk about how to do stuff, make tutorial videos, write blogs, telling friends and family. You can do all this on your own. And we've achieved all this, for the most part, by network effects of community building. That's the most important thing. It's not some guy in a top hat with a microphone telling you to stop drinking. Okay, it's nice to hear that kind of stuff once in a while, but you should never look to some single guru to have all the answers, right? You need to convince yourself that these things have value. And if you don't think they do, if you relied on other people telling you that they had value and you don't actually believe that they do, then maybe it's time to sell. Maybe it's time to exit. But if you sincerely believe, like I do, that HEX, PulseChain, and PulseX have great value propositions, that they're going to perform very well in the bull market. Look, we're all speculating here, but based on what I know, I'm confident this is all going to be fine. I'm confident the products are going nowhere. They're going to be here for a long, long time, potentially longer than our lifetime. So Richard doesn't need to shill HEX for you. That's our job, right? We are the network. And I think taking a backseat approach, going into humble mode, I really think this is a smart thing to do. I can name a couple of founders online, but when I go to CoinGecko and I go to the top 100 coins, how many of those founders can you actually name? Who's the Chainlink founder? Who's the Dogecoin founder? Who's the Polkadot founder? Who's the Cosmos founder? Look, you probably know who they are if you're deep within their communities and you're in their telegrams every day, but the average person doesn't know and doesn't care. And often they don't need to know or care because once the founder creates a creation and releases it into the wild, it's out there for the community to build upon, to maintain, to add to promote, to talk about. It's up to the community at this point. Who's the Litecoin founder? I know it's Charlie Lee, but how many people really know that? Go through the top 100 coins. How many of these coins can you actually name the founders of? Be honest, right? So we need to stop glorifying one man, putting him on a pedestal like he's some holier than thou figure. We need to stop treating him like a freaking high priest. That's why people call us a cult. Now, it's fun to joke. Yeah, sure, we're a cult. But we shouldn't be worshiping one man who's built things that exist, and we highly appreciate it. Thank you, Richard. But there's no need to worship one man and place all your power in the fate of whatever happens to him, because his products are different than him, and they're going to survive regardless of what happens to Richard. Now, I'm hoping for the best. I want him to beat the case. I want the SEC to prove these are not securities and to prove false the allegation of misappropriation of funds. I can easily envision a reality where that is happening, where that's all true, and I actually give it a pretty high probability. But with these imaginary horribles, look, RH goes to jail, HEX is a security, website goes down. All these things don't matter as much as people say. We could live in a world where all these things are unfortunately true, and with the network effects of getting new people on board and building new things, builders are like the most important people at this point. Builders are one thing, content creators are another thing. That's all communities are. And I see us building everywhere I look. I see people making content everywhere I look. I see things better than they ever were in the community, right? The prices are down. It's a bear market, yes. That's why the prices are down. But when I see the energy that people are putting their blood, sweat, and tears into the PulseChain ecosystem, we need to even stop calling it the Richard Hart ecosystem, okay? It's the PulseChain, it's the HEX ecosystem. Richard has nothing to do with these things anymore. We're lucky he's still around. We're lucky he's still educating online, explaining the benefits of Pulse and HEX. He doesn't need to do anything anymore. It's completely community owned. The community maintains PLS. HEX and PulseX, they live on top of the blockchain with no off switch. Okay, so realize that about these cryptocurrencies, and that from a technical point of view, they are truly decentralized. People conflate, some guy owns a lot of coins, so it must be centralized. No, there's technical centralization, and then there's economic centralization. Every single coin in the top 100 is very highly economically centralized. This works, right? Satoshi owns 1 million Bitcoin. What if Satoshi dumps all of his Bitcoin tomorrow? Chainlink, the founders of Chainlink own like 40%. There's not even 40% of Chainlink all liquid on the market, right? So we need to also differentiate. And what is decentralization? It matters more from a technical point of view. Not that one guy owns more coins than another guy. That's economic centralization. It doesn't matter. When it comes to shutting off crypto, can the government come in and shut off HEX? No. Can the government come in and shut off PLS? No. Can they shut off PulseX? No. Realizing this will probably help you sleep at night. And if it doesn't, I'm sorry. This might not be the game for you. So I hope this was somewhat valuable. It's always worthwhile just to think about the worst case scenarios, just so that you can realize that even the worst case scenarios aren't so bad. Thanks. I'll see you on the next video.